from me to you. If you have love for me, say not, I love you, and that will keep me free. If I have love for you, I shall not say, I love you, and that will keep you free.
When was it that you first got interested in poetry?
Well, I didn't get interested. Poetry grabbed me, and I was 5 years old.
Oh, okay.
And my first poems, that one I was 5, and all my first poems were in German, because I was born in Berlin, but I'm actually Austrian because my father was a journalist and was living in Berlin at the time, so I was born there. But because he's Austrian, I was Austrian. And then, well, Hitler took over Germany in 1933. I was 5 at that point. And we went to Vienna where my grandmother lived. And I lived there for the next 5 years until Hitler hopefully chased us out again. So all that time I was writing. And I learned I knew how to read at 3. So I've been reading all my life. And the one book that I carried, I can't believe this heavy book, that I would, escaping the Nazis, would have that book still. It's over 1,000 pages, and it's Grimm's fairy tales.
Oh, wow.
In the old German script. And I was reading fairy tales and writing, and from age 5. But I knew how to read since 3. So you're saying it wasn't interested. It was just that this is what you do. It was almost like an order.
Happened.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There was no doubt of it.
Right.
And I love language, so.
Wow.
And of course, originally I wrote in German, and then I started, of course, learning English once I got here. And now I want to just mention how I learned English.
Okay.
I didn't know any English when I arrived here, and my parents put me into a children's home so I wouldn't be running the streets. I mean, I was 10 and a half, and I was used to complete freedom in Vienna. This was kind of confining. But nobody spoke German where I was. But I would pick up sounds and meanings the way a baby would. And so I actually learned it orally.
Oh,
which,
wow.
yeah, I mean, because nobody said this is a table and this and tish, nobody, but I figured it out like a baby would learning language.
How old were you then when you were here, when you came here?
Between 10 and 12.
Yeah.
So by the time I was 12, I spoke pretty fluently. People say I don't have much of an accent. Well, some of it has to because I learned it by ear.
Oh, yeah.
And I think there is a school of learning languages. I forgot the name of it.
Yeah.
A certain method that uses that exactly.
Right.
I forgot the name of it.
Was it Rosetta Stone? Or,
I don't know who, but the point is, so I love language, I love sound, so my work not only has to express the meanings I meant, but it also has to have the rhythms and the sounds. And in fact, some musicians were asked what they thought of my poetry with their music. And one of them, Carl Schön, actually, who plays the sax and what you have, sax and flute on there, told the person who was interviewing, he said, "Oh, she's a trumpet."
She's a trumpet.
Yeah.
I like that. Yeah. So there's a trumpet in your soul. Yeah.
Yeah. So I was always very pleased that the musicians accepted me as one of their musicians instead of, oh, there she goes with these words.
Yeah.
And I actually started doing that. I mean.
Yeah, I was wondering when did that occur? Did that happen while you were here in San Francisco?
Let me tell you the story.
Okay.
So now you know how I learned English by sound.
Right.
Okay, so I hitchhiked to New Orleans in 1950 I was living in Chicago, ended up in New York, Greenwich Village in 1949, and 1950 I got to New Orleans. all these musicians, and then I used to jam with them. And then in '52, ended up in San Francisco. I'm walking down the street, and there is Johnny Elgin, who was a keyboard player in New Orleans, saying, "What are you doing in San Francisco?" He said, "Well, I got married, and I live over there by Church Street. Why don't you come and see us sometime? All these good cats are jamming there all the time, right there." So he had only musicians living there. There, because his wife was renting out rooms to them. And then I used to show up, and we would jam. But before that, I was in New Orleans, and I jammed with some of the musicians. But we never did it in public. It was just in somebody's basement, or whoever had a piano in an open space. That's where we would jam.
Wow.
So Johnny Elgin was part of that, and when he saw me in San Francisco, he says, "Hey, why don't you come and join us?" So 2 years later, or 3 years later, 3 of the musicians that were living there opened up the club, The Cellar, in North Beach.
Really?
Right
Okay.
on Green Street.
Yeah.
And so they asked me, they said, "Do you want a night for poetry and jazz? It's yours." I said, "Well, I'll take Wednesday." So I was just doing what came naturally. I never thought I was innovating any great thing, you see.
When they said poetry and jazz, did that mean you would read some poetry
Yeah.
and then they would play some jazz?
Well, at the same time. You've heard me, haven't you?
Yes, I've heard you, but I'm curious about the integration of the poetry and the jazz.
I think you only heard me with Hal's Log. I don't think you heard me with a trio.
I've watched a couple of the various videos on YouTube of you.
Well,
I'm
if
not
you
sure
look
of
at
that.
the CD that you just got,
Yeah.
you can hear, because I integrate with the sound with it. I mean, I make my words clear, but I rhythm it to it.
Oh, I
take
agree.
my pauses and breaks. So,
Right.
so I was doing that in now, by the way, that was 1956 when the Cellar opened.
Right.
And I did that for about a year and a half.
Right.
And then I left for Big Sur because I had enough of the city.
Oh, yeah.
So other people took it over,
Right.
and they were savvy enough with the media, which I was not, and managed to get Fantasy Record to record them. And I'm talking people like Ferlingeri and some of those
Sure.
that recorded, but they didn't do this till 1959. That was 3 years after the club opened.
I'm curious. So prior to 1956, were you? Did you know of other poets that were involved in working with jazz, or is it something that just
but
kind
I
of happened?
actually, and
Yeah.
David doesn't remember this, but I was doing this every week, and then I thought, well, I should invite other poets to do this.
Right.
And I'd heard David Meltzer, and he's got a good sound rhythm. His was more blues, mine was more bebop.
Okay.
But I asked him, I said, why don't you drop in some Wednesday and
Right.
do it?
Right.
So he did, and I talked to him recently, and he doesn't remember that particularly,
Yeah.
but I know, but he always had a musical ear too.
Right.
Many people who are into literature do not.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just not one of their forties. They are
Right.
good in other things.
Yeah.
But to me, the sound is as important as the meaning, and the two have to meld and make it naturally so.
Right.
And there's no explanation there; it evokes it.
So you definitely were at that forefront of utilizing poetry
They
and
probably-
integrating it with the music.
Yeah, I actually, I just remembered something else, sorry.
That's
I
all
said in 1950, I did this in New Orleans.
Yeah.
Well, actually, a year before that, 1949, I did some of that in Chicago.
You did.
I was living in a place called the Art Circle. There are mostly painters and writers living there. But every so often, there'd be these musicians from the South Side, most of them were black, drop in and jam in the living room. So I would join them, and we actually jammed some. So I actually did that in Chicago in 1949, in 1950 New Orleans, and then in 53 I was jamming, 54 in San Francisco, and then the club opened up in 1956. I'm just trying to clarify dates.
Sure, absolutely. Yeah, there's
Put
a
it
lot
in
there.
Right, said it. Okay.
Yeah, great. Okay. So you pretty much from a very early age integrated into the music, the music itself integrated into your work. You've definitely collaborated with. Were there particular individuals that you really felt a deep connection with in those early years? You know, musicians.
Well, I didn't know too many musicians when I was younger.
Mm-hmm.
And then when I first heard bebop jazz,
Mm-hmm.
I thought that is my sound.
Mm.
And I was living with a saxophone player in Chicago in 1949, Billy Cannon.
Mm.
And he had just come from New York and had lived with Charlie Parker.
Mm-hmm.
And Charlie Parker's lady used to call him,
Oh.
my friend,
Mm-hmm.
Little Bird, because Charlie Parker was called Bird.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you know.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, yes.
And so Billy Cannon really, as I've said before, opened up my third ear, because we would get all these vinyls and just play Charlie Parker and Lady Day and you mentioned Lester Young, you know, Prez, and on, Monk and Bud Powell and who's the wonderful gypsy, Django Reinhardt.
Yeah. Okay.
And these were all people that I got to know because of this musician.
Right.
Yeah. So, and they were naturally, I just completely was able to enter their directions. You know, there were long shots and short pulls, and I saw colors.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I really felt at home with the music, and I loved Billie Holiday, and I knew Anita O'Day. We didn't really know each other. She used to perform in a club in Chicago, just a few blocks from where I lived, and I would go hear her. This is 48, 49.
Wow.
And then I saw her again in San Francisco in the late 70s. She was at a club on Polk Street, and I saw her name, and I expected there'd be a door charge, like $50. There were 3 people in the club. There was no door charge. And I said, is that Anita? And I went up to her, and she says, yeah. She said, the States sucks. I'm going back to Japan where they really appreciate me.
Yeah.
And I got a record from her that she signed for me.
Wow.
And I said, I know you wouldn't remember me because this has happened 40 years before. But I used to go to the club on Clark Street where you performed back in 1949. And I always loved your sound, you know. So,
Amazing. Absolutely amazing.
Yeah.
Wow. So I also noticed in your biographical information in Wikipedia that says that you are also a playwright. Is that true?
I've written about a dozen plays, and about half of them have been
Performed.
Again and again. Most recently, I think it was 2007, again in Vienna. Krista Stippinger, who works with mostly the Romus, the gypsies, has included me into her edition Exile. She's published 4 books of mine, and she mounted 3 of my plays, and she put this book out called No Dancing Allowed, which was the name of one of my plays, and it's ALOUD. And so, but what I want to mention is that whatever I do, whether it's painting or plays or stories or whatever, the source is always poetry. I mean, my plays are really poetry plays. You know, I mean, symbolisms and characters representing. And my sets, my suggestions for sets are very Japanese, very simple, like a line to represent it. I don't have overstuffed couches and Victorian lamps in my place.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes. No, I know that it's clear that your work is encompassed within the poetry of your work.
Yeah.
And so that's why my next question was when your first poetry book came out. When did you first publish?
Okay.
Yeah.
My first book came out in 1958. And it was really half self-published, sort of. We called it the Ellis Street Press, but I happen to be living on Ellis Street in the Western Edition, which was later torn down.
Right.
And the name of the first book was Steps. And what it was is I had, the title poem was One More Step West is the Sea.
Mm-hmm.
And in it, I wrote about how I felt the city was actually suiciding itself.
Really?
Yes, and I'm going to read some of that tonight.
Oh.
But I actually wrote it in '58 when they were tearing down the Western Addition and all that. So, in the second part, I had a chart with about 41 dragons that somebody gave me. It wasn't until years later I found out in the Chinese side, I am a dragon. I didn't know that.
Really?
I had these 41 dragons with drawings, and I did like a very short 2-line poem for each one of them. So that was published in my first book, and the book itself is called Steps.
Steps.
And the image was a dragon.
Mm-hmm.
But the first part, half of the book, is One More Step West is the Sea,
Mm-hmm.
which was 5 years after I got to San Francisco, arrived. And the second part is 41 Dragon Steps, which actually makes one long poem. And I was looking at that very book recently and realized I'm going to excerpt a few pieces from it because it fits what's going on in 2014.
Amazing,
right now.
yeah.
I mean, I actually talked about the city watching out for he has a cement and steel greedy eye, and you can,
Yeah.
And I wrote that in '57, so the first
Okay.
book came out in '58.
58. Okay.
And then somebody in Germany who's been publishing beat poets. I did one on Diane de Prima, Jack Kerouac, and Corso, you name it. And I'm number 21. And he read that, and he translated. My friend Horst, who's actually a friend of Jerry here, Horst Spandler, has done a lot of my translations. And he translated that. And a publisher in Germany, a young man who was living, just like we Beats did, from hand to mouth, is publishing all these books with his own little bit of money that he gets from, I think, the state. Anyway, his press is called Städtlicher Presse, which means city press. And he's done, and the whole series is called Heartbeat. And so I was number 21, that Heartbeat. Almost everybody's in, Lou Welch, I could just go on and on. It has, really, it has been published by small little books, German, English. And so when you asked me for my first book, after all these years in 13, I forgot, 2012 or 13, this was republished since 1958.
Oh, it was republished in 2012?
Yeah, or 13,
Okay,
I forgot.
so recently.
Yeah, very.
Great.
Yeah. It's funny because I've had about 5 or 6 books published in the last 2 years.
Yeah.
And I hardly any before that. I have 16 books out so
Well, it
far.
seems that people have woken up and recognize your work now.
Well, let me tell you what was a big gate opener. There's a book called Women of the Beat Generation. It came out in 1996, Conari Press, Brenda Knight. Brenda called me up. She got she has a funny story of how she connected with me. Is there time to tell this?
Oh, absolutely. Yes,
Okay.
I'd love to hear about that.
Okay. She wanted to do a book on the women, because where are the women? None of them, nobody's ever heard of them.
Right.
So she went to City Lights, and she was looking and looking, and her foot hit something under a bookcase, and she pulls it out. It's full of spider webs and everything, and it's one of my books.
Hidden underneath the shelf.
Yeah, it must have been there for years.
Wow.
So she realized, looking at it, that I was part of that period, and then she went to the Bancroft Library at University in Berkeley, over in Berkeley University of California, UC, and found me, and then followed it up by calling me. At first I thought, somebody else just cashing in on the beat thing, what do you want now? And then I was listening to her, and I realized how passionate she was about helping women get out. So I was able to be of some assistance to help her find some of these women, which included Jan Kerouac, who was Jack's daughter, and published a love book, and both of them were very ill when I got in touch with them. Neither one wanted to be involved with this. And I said, I don't care how sick you are, this is an important book. Here is the phone number. Please call it. Both of them did. Both of them are in the book. Jan actually died before the book came out, and Lenore just died about a year and a half ago.
Okay.
But anyway, so that has opened the doors.
Right.
So I really need to say that Brenda Knight, Knight, was really mainly responsible for opening that door.
Right.
Because then other things happened,
Yeah.
both to me and Joanna McClure and other people were completely unknown.
Yeah. See, it's just about awareness. So once
Yeah.
people found out, then
Does that answer?
It does. It does. And yeah, I mean, it's interesting to me because even in my own limited understanding of the world of poetry, you hear the names of the men. Pretty much, that's what you're ingrained in. You don't really know that there were a cross section of women involved in the scene too.
True poetry comes direct from the heart,
Of course.
not the head. The head can follow up and round out some rough edges, but unless your heart's in it, you can have all the knowledge you want and it wouldn't work. I think it's the same with music, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, there are people who can't even read notes, which includes me, by the way.
Ah, that's all right.
I do not know how to read any notes, but if your heart and ear open up, that's where it's,
Many people in the new music community, experimental worlds, are in the same place. It's all about the creation of the sound. Don't know necessarily.
Could I bring
know the
something
notes.
in that has nothing to do with your interview, which I feel important?
Sure, absolutely.
In Mendocino, there's a yearly film festival. Well, I've been so busy, I really don't have time to do that. I'm not going to Europe this year, for example. And I looked through the program, and there's one program jumped out, and I said, if nothing else, I have to see this. It's about a woman, and she just died, was 109 years old.
Really?
She was in concentration camp at some point and managed to survive it.
Right.
I forgot her first name. Her last name is Herz Sommer, which means heart summer.
Yes.
And she was 109, and the title of the movie is Music Saved My Life.
Oh.
Right.
Yeah.
And I can't wait. So I went to buy the tickets for it and found out it was sold out.
Oh dear.
2 days after the tickets were available. Nobody expected that. So they opened up having another showing. And I said, you better get me in there for that. But I just want to say, when she said music saved my life, well, I feel the same way about poetry.
Yeah.
And I think I gave you a note. I think that tells it what I feel about my life with poetry.
Exactly.
And I knew that was my path.
Yeah.
And I made some very early decisions, which you wouldn't think a child would. I knew I was never want to have children. Because I knew, being a Cancer, I'm maternal, and I knew my energy would go there, and I was willing to face poverty, whatever was necessary, because that was my chosen path.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
So that kind of leads up,
It was my choice. It chose me.
And speaking of choice, you made a choice to work with an idea I had to work with Doug Linner, the synthesizer, Buchla synthesizer
I
player.
was very excited.
Yeah.
I've never worked with electronics before.
Yeah, I'm curious then what your thoughts, your preliminary thoughts are on maybe what folks might experience when they come to the summit this year.
But all I can tell you is my own experience and see how they relate.
Sure, of course.
Hal, who's going to be working
Hal
on
Davis,
that. Hal Davis is going to be doing the log. And myself and Douglas, we all met right in this space to have a little jam just to see if we can even hear each other.
Of course.
We spent maybe an hour at the most, and it was very exciting because from what I gathered, Doug was very tuned into chords, responses, colors, and he and Hal Davis seemed to. So all three of us, and we didn't have a real rehearsal because we want to keep it improvised.
Of course.
But I just gave him some ideas about short and length, and from there we'll just see what happens.
Wow, yeah.
But so it's going to be as much a revelation to us as it will be to the audience.
Excellent. And that's what's really important about what we do at the summit, and what the community is involved in, is that.
I think that's, and I have actually shied away from electronics, because but here's the funny thing. Years ago in the early 70s, and I was running a poetry reading at a place called Minnie's Can Do. It was an open reading in the Fillmore. And that's another story how we met. I don't want to go into that. But I did a weekly poetry reading there for about 2 years. Open reading. There were 20, 25 poets a night reading there. One day, Minnie calls me up. She said, meet me at the club. It was in San Francisco, Phil. And, okay. So I went over there, and she said, we're going to buy a microphone right now. I said, no, I don't squeak, and no, I don't want that. I want the natural voice. Yeah. She said, we're going to get a mic. I said, all right. And the first year, I was shying away, because I know my voice is strong enough to reach. But now I've been working with a microphone, and I love it because it has nuances that I can't get otherwise.
That's right, yeah.
And so another door is opening with electronic music, which I have, no, I don't want anything to do, acoustic only. You know.
Yeah, I wasn't sure when I first met you and I read your information, and I just had this idea, and I knew Doug, and I thought, that might work. And I'm so happy to hear that.
Yeah,
something's
I felt
going to
very good
happen.
about it. And he felt good about it. You know.
That's great.
And Hal Davis felt good about it.
That's wonderful.
So it's just the three of us, right? And we'll see what happens.
So it sounds to me that you definitely live your philosophy and took the bend in the road.
I take the bend in the road,
right.
and I'm not afraid of falling on my face. I mean, well, none of us are perfect.
That's right, yeah.
I don't need the perfect note. I just need the perfect road to acceleration.
And bring you where you need to be.
Yeah, exactly.
Exactly. Well, on that note, I'm going to end the interview, and I'm really happy I got a chance to talk with you, Ruth, and we look forward to hearing you at the Outstanding Music Summit on, I believe that's going to be July
30th.
July 30th, that's right, July 30th, 2014.
Yeah, so. I'm a stickler. I mean, I have enough German in me to read dates and numbers. Yeah. I love numbers.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
So it was wonderful being interviewed by you, Rent, because of course you're part of that world, so you're doing it from the inside out.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Okay. So let me just say I have love for you. You got to give without wanting to get, to learn receiving. Let today be today.